And now for the Drew Sutton Leadership Show, lighting the way with real leaders, real stories, and real impacts. Because when leaders stop growing, the darkness wins. All right, welcome to another amazing episode of the Drew Sutton Leadership Show. Today we have Michael Potter, the founding member of the and board of trustees of the Lunar Art Museum. Michael is a social impact innovator and multi-award-winning documentary filmmaker. He is a co-founder of the nonprofit organization Geeks Without Frontiers and its initiative, the N50 Project. Potter also serves as the global leader on the global leadership board of the Austin-based Balton Art Museum. He is the producer of art documentaries such as Tracks, Stumbling Stones in Amsterdam, Space for Art, and his space and technology documentaries include Orphans of Apollo, The University, and Poet to the Stars. Potter is an investor in disruptive outer space technology projects and a super interesting guy. All right, so without any further ado, welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, thanks, Drew. Great to be back with you.
Yeah, man. It's been fun getting to know you. You have done a lot of things. What got you started in so like when you were coming out of high school and you're deciding, hey, this is what I want to do with my life. What got you started down the entrepreneur journey?
You know, it's something that's super funny is that growing up in Southern California, almost everybody in my neighborhood, all the parents of everybody I grew up with, they were almost all involved with aerospace. So most of it was getting humans to the moon in the Apollo program. But the other part was trying to win the Cold War against the Soviets. And everybody, we had a few lawyers, a few doctors, a few businessmen, but almost everybody was aerospace engineers. And it wasn't until I was like in my 20s that I realized that wasn't a normal neighborhood. It just happened to be in Southern California. We were right down the street from Northrop Aircraft. We were right down the street from TRW, right down the street from Rockwell. So it was an unusual upbringing, which most young people take everything for granted. They have no clue. And then once they get a few data points in life, they realize, oh, well, that's unusual.
I didn't know that about you. That's super cool. As an aerospace engineer, I think that you had an amazing upbringing, it sounds like. Did you have any dads on the block that were like super tinkerers? I know that Steve Jobs tells a story about one of the dads gave him some electronics early to play with. Did you have any, who's your favorite dad on the block besides your own, of course?
Yeah. No, so it's super interesting. So my father was a World War II fighter pilot who did escort missions over Europe. And I think many pilots of that generation were very mechanical. And it was kind of a survival skill. Like you wanted to know how the aircraft ran. You wanted to know if the engine, something was off with the engine. Normally you'd feel it in the performance. And you wanted to be super specific with the mechanics when you came back and said, hey, I'm having a hard time turning this way or turning that way. And so I grew up, my father, because he was based, even though he was American, he's based in London. He was totally enamored with British sports cars. So that was kind of an unusual thing to grow up with that. But our next door neighbor was a World War II aircraft mechanic. And, he was just one of those people that there's only a few people I met in my life that were just so intuitive with anything mechanical, just amazingly intuitive and a super great inspiration. And the good thing about that was that because he was so gifted, like I knew that I could never be that good no matter what, like it just was in his DNA. So it was good to say, hey, like I respect people who are mechanical. I have enough to do basic things and to be functional. But like, I would never want to go down that path because I know when someone's truly gifted.
This is, it's such cool to hear this part of your story, because I think this is the reason, this is my argument for going to college. There's a kind of an undercurrent that says, oh, you don't need to go to college. And I don't think that college is for everybody, but the opportunity to be surrounded by people that just blow you away in their field, doctors, lawyers, this next door neighbor of yours. I've had a couple of moments in my life where I remember being in the room and being like, I am the dumbest person in this room by an order of magnitude. And it was so good for me, right? Because it inspired me, said, hey, this is what humanity can be, and I want to be in that game. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think also, one of the things I worked in a machine shop, and the caliber of people, it was a machine shop, but it was mostly related to manufacturing, and I was almost killed by a bit that came off of a mill by somebody who was a drug user, an illegal drug user, and that was the epiphany. That moment was the epiphany where I said, "Hey, I don't want to be in this business. I don't want to be in manufacturing. I don't want to be in machining." And it really inspired me to get my act together in college.
I love it. I love it. There's are you familiar with despair.com? It is
No.
all right. So they sell demotivational posters. So you're like, all right, you know what a motivational poster is. Well, my favorite one of all time is there's this ship, like this oil tanker, and it's like sticking out of the water, like really high. And it says mistakes. Sometimes your job is to tell others where the rocks are.
Yeah. So that's those are good epiphanies.
Yeah. All right. So you're in college and you end up in the telecommunications area. How did you make it from college? What was your major in college? And then how did you go from that to telecom?
So it is kind of an unusual segue, but so I was so this is during the Cold War. I was an arms control expert, and so that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up graduating from college. I did an internship with the United Nations. So this is back during the Cold War days. I went to Geneva. I worked with the 18 Nation Disarmament Committee, and it was a complete farce. The whole thing was, the UN doesn't always have a good reputation in terms of politics and bureaucracy, but firsthand it was kind of an unpleasant experience. I mean, I learned a lot, but also kind of an epiphany, like, hey, if you want to change the world, don't do it in this kind of institutional way. So I ended up going to Washington, D.C., and ended up working for a foreign policy think tank. And when I was going through the interviews, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I wanted to do arms control, because that's what I was trained as. And they said, yeah, but all the people that we would consider hiring for arms control, they're PhD or PhD candidates, they speak Russian, and you don't have that background. But they said, we do have a position for you that we think would be perfect. And it's a sleepy little part of the think tank, and it's called international communications. And so I thought to myself, I said, well, this sounds so sleepy, and it's not really as dynamic as everything I had learned and trained for. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just do it for a little bit, and then I'll transition. But it turned out that was the inflection point when global telecommunications was about to become deregulated. And so there I was. And it was interesting because many of the basic international treaties for arms control are very similar to some of the international communications treaties. Those is the same thing. And the main governing body for global telecommunications is the International Telecommunications Union, which has been around since the 1860s, which is now a United Nations agency. It's based out of Geneva. So and it's probably most relevant for people in the field of satellite communication. So it's the orbital slots, the frequencies, those sort of things. So there I went. So when I try to describe my background, the things that's always been consistent has been international and technology, and generally some sort of space connection, but almost always international and technology.
I am absolutely floored. This did not come out this is so exciting, because as a technologist myself, I used to lead a research lab for a Fortune 500 company. Really, contracts and communications between entities is a big deal. That's where generally the technical solution is not the hard solution. The hard solution is the people solution.
That's right.
So you've been managing the border crisis since the 90s, right? So let's talk about this. Is one of my favorite stories you shared with me, and I was like, oh, we have to have this on the show because it speaks quintessentially to the technologists coming over political challenges. It's just a classic gritty story of entrepreneurship. So there you are, you're in telecoms. Your job is to run wires across Europe, and then you discover that you can't run it across the border. They are not open borders. How did you solve that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when I saw some of the prep outline that you had prepared, and you talked about the border crisis, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is the contemporary issue of immigration. But this is a super contemporary issue in the sense that it deals with inconsistencies with European law and European regulations. And so when we started doing competitive communications in Europe, it was virtually illegal to compete against the monopoly phone companies of Europe. And it was interesting because in many countries, they call it the PTT, Post and Telephone and Telegraph. Almost every country on the planet had a monopoly in this area, and these were some of the largest organizations in those countries, the biggest employers. So when we went into these countries to compete, and we found a legal loophole that allowed us to begin the competition, and but all of the countries that we encountered were violating the European Union law that they had signed up to. They were all involved with anti-competitive behavior. So and so we had to fight each of these countries. We took the country of Spain to the European Commission, and it was an adjudication hearing. They called the government of Spain to this adjudication in Brussels. And the representatives from Spain started off by saying, we represent the Kingdom of Spain, and basically we do whatever we want. And the European Commission said, no, you signed on to these agreements, and you are being governed by the European Union out of Brussels. And we ended up winning the adjudication on that. But these issues still go on today. So if you look at the NATO funding, the 5% NATO funding, the Europeans were reluctant to step up and to provide the financing to defend Europe from particularly the Russians. And so it's the American defense umbrella, which is billions and billions and billions of dollars a year.
Oh yeah.
And in the recent NATO summit, the Spaniards said, no, we don't want to pay the 5%. Now, remember, when they do 5%, it's really not going entirely to NATO. It's going to roads, it's going to bridges, it's going to other things. And so the administration's response was, okay, well, we'll just deal with that in the tariffs. We'll just pick up that money in the tariffs. The Europeans are supposed to have a unified foreign policy. And just last week, the French said, no, we're going to recognize Palestine, which is in contradiction to the entire European Union. The French government uses nuclear power, but all the other European countries say, no, nuclear power is a bad thing. So these are the inconsistencies that we stepped into when we tried to bring kind of American-style competition to Europe.
Right. So this is the 90s, right? I think that most of the folks that are listening today, we grew up in a social media world. We feel like the world is super flat. I am of the right age that I remember when the world wasn't flat. And you are literally, this whole story takes context of when we are flattening out the world here, right? Was there a moment in your career somewhere between college, your work with UN, and then this telecom thing where you thought, little old me is changing this? Like, were you ever scared? Did you have any crazy interactions where somebody came and made you an offer you couldn't refuse?
Well, I will tell you, because these are the largest employers in almost every European country, there were occasionally concerns for our safety because, literally they were hiring 50, 60, 100,000 people in each of these countries. And our argument was we were just trying to give consumers more choices and lower prices. And, so they go with the monopoly, the government monopoly, few choices and high prices. And
right,
so,
yeah.
So that was unacceptable. So, part of this problem was that, obviously the cheapest thing would have been to go to the monopoly phone companies to get fiber optics. And the original hack was we would try to get raw copper pairs to our customers, and then we'd put special electronics on that. But imagine being in the downtown areas of many of these historic medieval cities. They have to pull out all the cobblestones to put in the copper wires, which is totally inefficient. But their own anti-competitive laws were forcing this facade. And we were in this awkward situation, which is, hey, we're disrupting all this traffic. We're creating all this chaos. We're forced to. We have a gun to our head to do this. And in some of these countries, and I particularly think of the French government. Remember what they did with the Rainbow Warrior? They blew up the Rainbow Warrior, which was a green ship trying to stop whaling. The French government has a reputation for going after innovators. Back then, in kind of a hard physical kinetic way, and now they just do it through legal warfare. But 20 or 30 years ago, it was, things could get serious, and it happened to Greenpeace, and we saw it happen.
So how do you, as an individual human, look at this situation and say, I think this is what's best for Europe, for the future, but I know that I'm going to go tangle with the Kingdom of Spain? How do you emotionally decide to get involved, and then how do you stay involved, as the pressure comes?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a lot of pressure. Just doing a startup company is a lot of pressure, or doing entrepreneurism is a lot of pressure. But I think that for us, it was such a core value that we wanted to fight for consumers. We wanted to fight for choice. We wanted to fight for lower. So we really felt like history was on our side, and we could be the victims of a successful campaign to discredit us and to make it difficult. But I think we just kept it super simple. Like, let's just stick to the core values. And I think, I'm not trying to equate myself with Steve Jobs, but I think that's one of the lessons that Jobs has for a lot of entrepreneurs, which is just stick with simple core values and just run with it. And, if the planets line up, we'll be victorious. And I think that was kind of how we looked at it.
I love that. Well, we're going to fast forward here to today. As it turns out, we are still facing these international crises of communication and infrastructure. The most pressing one is AI. And I think this is how you and I got connected. I think you posted a blog post on AI and the power needs of AI, and how that's a major, our current power grid is not really there. So kind of recap the problem for us, and then let's talk about some of the things that you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the interesting things, I know that this show today, we're going to talk a lot about outer space. And it's interesting because, in the race to the moon, which was really a superpower race, it was, each system, the Soviet system trying to discredit capitalism trying to discredit Soviet-style communism. Fortunately, the commies lost out, and fortunately, capitalism and democracy prevailed. But I think that right now we're going through a similar geopolitical competition. And, one of the big questions is, which country on the planet is going to be the first to achieve super intelligence? And, as an American, I hope that it's the values, the Western free values, that wins out. And, but the big question is, the first country that achieves superintelligence, or more importantly, if adversaries believe that there might be a superintelligence breakout, would an adversary be motivated to consider a preemptive strike on the data centers of the other adversaries? So that's the geopolitical context, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. The thing that drives all that is power. So the likely winner of superintelligence is likely to be that country with the biggest data centers, the most AI cards, and the most power. And so one of the problems in the United States, it's a huge weakness, is that a number of the states are highly regulated, and so if you want to bring new power into a place like Texas or Connecticut, there just is a tremendously long lead time for environmental permissions and getting the neighborhoods to buy into these things and for the politicians to approve it. In a place like California, it's the highest cost power than any other state in the United States, except certain places in Hawaii. That's a little bit higher. So California is not a player. California is out of the competition. Boom, game, lights out. They can never recover. So the big states that are more likely to be significant players in the role of superintelligence and data centers is a place like Texas, where they really want to bring on nuclear power. It's going to be hard, to do it in a timely fashion, where they have the ability to bring on power rapidly. And, so there's tremendous number of, AI data centers coming online in Texas. Tennessee is where Elon's been very active outside of Nashville. Louisiana is one of the states that seems like it's going to be one of the players. And so it's kind of interesting. Only a few of the states are going to participate in contributing to making the United States a viable competitor in terms of this geopolitical competition for the breakout on superintelligence. It's super, super interesting. And I recently published a blog piece with professor at Stanford, Professor Ben Schwegler, and it was on this issue of AI infrastructure. And the short issue is that as a country and as a discipline of people who build infrastructure, we don't have all the tools to be thinking about this in a systematic way. And you're talking about data centers that will be a million square feet, over 50 acres or over 100 acres. I mean, just huge, super significant data centers. And so the call to action is really to try to think about things in a more coherent way. And one of the things, going back to the issue of power, is that when you locate a data center, you want to make sure that it has all the key routes for thick fiber. You want to make sure that you're on the routes for be able to bring up major power capacity, and that includes you want to be close to natural gas pipelines. And it's interesting because in the old days we thought about cities in kind of whatever the specific geography of a literal city was, or maybe a literal county. But that's not how we think about data centers. And I think one of the things that's also very important is that these kind of mega data centers are also going to be the logical place to, in the future, make as kind of the headquarter hub areas for drone activity. So we want them to be kind of combined in the same areas. And so if you look at a state like Texas, they're on the forefront of kind of autonomous driving. We've got Waymo, we've got Tesla coming in with autonomous taxis, but also for drone delivery. And so we have some of the big drone beta demonstration projects taking place in Dallas.
Yeah, actually, I got to spend a lot of time in Fort Worth. For me, I work for Bell Helicopter. And so drones are near and dear to my heart. So, all right, let's talk about a young Michael Potter who is in the year 2025, and he's hearing that AI is the new nuclear arms race, the new Cold War. How can a young Michael Potter get involved and succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it depends on people's skill sets and kind of their intrinsic talents. And so, I would urge young people to try to become a little bit more intimate with their superpowers and trying to identify superpowers. And I think that we have these kind of innate talents, and our talents don't really change over time. Our interests change over time, but our talents don't change over time. And so the more familiar that people are with their talents, I think it better allows them to kind of organize and plan for their future. I mean, it's always challenging, I think, to plan when we're in an environment where everything's moving exponential. It's kind of hard when you say, "Hey,
yeah,
I've graduated from high school, so what will I do kind of when I grow up?" But I think that it starts with trying to understand your superpowers. The second thing I would say is that AI is extremely high leverage. So it's like really understanding AI. And if someone has a science background or they're technologists, maybe they don't have to spend too much time worrying about ethics and some of these other issues, which there'll be a lot of people worrying about, a lot of policymakers, maybe people who are more kind of liberal arts in their dispositions. They're going to be spending a lot of time on that. But the exciting part are those people that have technical backgrounds. I think it's going to be super exciting. And I think for young people, you know, being virtual and being online, it's kind of harder to find your tribe, and it's harder to find your community. And so I would really encourage young people to focus all your life on finding your tribe and building your community. And maybe that doesn't sound so relevant in the age of hypermedia and in the age of AI and so forth, but I think it's even more important. And then the final thing, and Drew, I know you probably have a lot of strong opinions on this, but I think mentorship, because a lot of people say, hey, if I have AI, and they're finding that right now, a lot of young people are getting very intimate with AI, and they're asking AI questions about their personal romantic relationships, about how they should make decisions in their life, and so forth. But I think that real mentors in the real world, combined with building great skill, technical skills and AI skills, I think that will be the superpower. So I think people will, it's sort of like, bodybuilders, like some bodybuilders, they just spend all their time on their upper body, but they forget about their legs and things get unbalanced. So it's what I would say is like, learn about AI, learn about technical, but to be well balanced, I think finding your tribe, your community, and mentors, I think that makes it a more balanced composition.
I love that. I also get a kick out of your weightlifting comment. I bought myself a pair of these. They're called chicken socks, and they're like black socks, like thigh length socks, but they have a chicken leg on them. So you look like as you're doing your leg press, you look like you're a chicken. That's funny. Well, all right. So let's talk. We've talked AI. Actually, I want to pull this. I wanted to ask this question earlier, but it didn't quite flow. You grew up in a time in which you were surrounded by aspirational things. We were going to the moon. You had highly intelligent people around you kind of as role models, whether or not they were your active role models. You just kind of assumed people became these things, right? And then you also had a villain. The Cold War is very different. Today's villains is our neighbor, right? Like we're just looking at, we're all hating each other currently. Do we need a villain to push society forward, or is that kind of a thing that's of the past?
Well, I think it's super important for people to have a worldview and kind of a world philosophy. So for example, it's kind of simple. I mean, some people, believe in the general power of free markets, not unfettered free markets where people can pollute and, people can abuse their workers. But I think the type of free market where people have choices, where creative destruction, where the best ideas can win out, and that's just a basic value. That's a basic philosophy. And sadly, I think there's a lot of young people today that don't believe that. They don't buy into it. They don't accept it. They don't believe it. But the problem with that, and I mean, in a simple example is that there are many young progressives that think that billionaires are a failure of our system. That it's a total failure of our system to have billionaires. And so you look at somebody like Steve Jobs. In our pocket today, the supercomputer in our pocket today is worth at least $20 million. So, they've done studies to show how powerful that is. And even the technology that you've uniquely embraced to do the work that you do.
Well, in around the 90s, there was a drone at Bell Helicopter. And today my iPhone has more processing capability than all of its avionics combined. Right.
Yeah. So and by far the Apollo missions, and even today in space station. So I think that so somebody like Steve Jobs, because I believe in free markets, kind of manage free markets. I think it's a great success that somebody like Steve Jobs, who creates $20 million of value in everyone's pocket, of course he should be a billionaire. I don't have a problem. But a lot of young people don't understand that. So I think for me, trying to orient immediately on just a few core values is super important. And if you look at World War II and Chamberlain wanted peace in his time. He wanted to do a special deal with the Nazis. He wanted to do a special deal with Hitler. And that's a repulsive concept. Obviously, everybody wants peace. Everybody wants freedom. And even today, there's a lot of compromises that people seem like they're willing to make because they don't have a clear understanding of what is good and what is bad. And so I would start with that just as basic. And so in some ways, is that a bad guy? I mean, for me, the failure of communism, which people try to resuscitate, or totalitarianism, and you see that with radicalist jihadism. I mean, murdering people is kind of a bad thing. And so, but if people get confused on those sort of issues, everything that follows from that is confusing. So I think it's important, maybe not so much to focus on bad things, but to be clear on what works and why it works and why we reject what doesn't work. And under Soviet style communism, Stalin killed 20 million of his own people through forced collectivization. So that's bad. That's bad. Yeah. And they crushed religion, and I think people should be entitled. People want to, practice whatever type, of peaceful religion. And so there's some basic lessons. And so I think accepting that and then building positive life beyond that.
I love that. So let's talk about your positive life here. You've been a part of armistice. You've been a part of bringing telecoms. You've busted up monopolies in Europe. And I guess the world's too small for you because now you're taking on the moon. You're taking on space.
Yes. So, like I said, I mean, I really feel like the common consistent thread in my life has always been international technology, and there's generally been a space component to that. And we had an opportunity. We were introduced by a company that was building the first data server on the moon, and we had an opportunity to have a digital layer on that museum. And so we decided to create LUMA, the Lunar Museum of Art, which is a digital museum that rides on top of Lone Star. Lone Star is the provider that put the first private server on the moon. And the other kind of character in the story is a company out of Houston, Texas, a publicly traded company called Intuitive Machines. And they built 2 landers that have landed on the moon. And we had the good fortune this year of attending a launch at the Kennedy's Space Center in Florida. And it was a Falcon 9, Falcon launch. And it was just a beautiful, gorgeous launch, right around sunset in Florida. Everything was picture perfect. Everything was on time. We had this gorgeous launch. And, it was great because there was a group of us who had, with the Lone Star team and the Lunar Museum of Art team that were at the rooftop of a bar in Florida. And we were able to see the launch of the rocket, and it came straight over the balcony of this bar. And I think, one of the things that's been, maybe difficult and sad about NASA is that, in the early days, NASA gave so much inspiration, doing the lunar landings. And I think one of the things that's been hard for NASA is that when they really embraced institutionally this idea of failure is not an option, that has really created a lot of challenges, because if failure is not an option and you have to build the bureaucratic and institutional structures to try to deliver that, you take away all the excitement. And there we were on the rooftop, and this kind of miracle of this thing going off to the moon. I mean, a project that we had worked on for a few years. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of administrivia, and I can just tell you that it brings so much excitement to people. And I encourage people who haven't yet attended a rocket launch, you have to attend it, because, there's this kind of physical concussion that you feel at the launch itself. But one of the things that we're trying to do with the Lunar Museum of Art is we're trying to bring back the excitement that has sadly gotten lost. And I can just tell you that the audience that were on the roof of that bar that night at this launch so much excitement, so much optimism, and that's what we're trying to democratize to people everywhere.
I'm a little bit in awe, honestly. I'm imagining the launch. I've gotten to do some fun projects myself. I know when you pour yourself into a project for years and then you get to see it launched. Designing helicopter blades is about a 3-year process, and you really only one person can do it because everything's interconnected. And there's a romance that comes with it. You're like pouring yourself into this project, and then finally you see the first one come off the mold. Yeah, that's exciting. So let's talk about art a little bit, because you have an art museum on the moon. So you literally have launched a server. The server's on the moon. We'll talk about kind of the technical aspects of that in a second. But why art? So you come from this technical background, but you're still talking aspirational. How does art and technology connect?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, I think most people understand that art by itself, art and art museums, de facto have a lot of creativity. But, I think engineering and science also has a lot of creativity. And, you sometimes see some of these remarkable scientists who have these out of the box ways of looking at the world. I mean, Einstein looking at the space-time continuum and, this kind of fabric that, could be bent by gravitation. I mean, just extraordinary, and just tremendous creativity. So, I ended up on the Blanton board of trustees for the Blanton Art Museum, which is a very, very strong art museum in Austin, Texas. And we built, millions and millions of dollars of facilities and extensions and improvements. And, it was interesting because I was on that board during COVID. And one of the challenging things for a lot of the brick and mortar museums was everything shut down. And not only did everything shut down, but then, and of course, you didn't have the admission fees being paid. And, there were a lot of financial challenges with museums around the world. And, and so one of the challenges is like, how can we leverage digital art to make it more democratized? And, in a sense, how do you make it so that it is, kind of COVID proof, pandemic proof? How do you make pandemic proof? And one of the projects I got involved with during pandemic was I was part of the world's largest distributed memorial project. And these are these Holocaust memorial stones that go in front of the houses of victims of the Holocaust in Europe. And the way they do it is they pull out one of the cobblestones in front of these houses, and they replace it with another cobblestone that has a brass plaque inscription. And so we were part of a project that did this on the canals in Amsterdam. And so it just started off as a simple art project. That project was developed by a German artist based out of Berlin, Günther Deming. And he was the one that came up with the concept. And now it's in countries all over Europe. It's in cities all over Europe. And the great thing is that it's outdoors. So that project, not only is it the world's largest distributed memorial project, but it's also pandemic proof and there's an app that you can read. So if you go in front of someone's house, you see this plaque and you want to get more information, you can see that. So you can see that through an app. So in some ways, it's kind of old style. It's an old style kind of memorial, but fully digital. Yeah. And we ended up doing a documentary short on that, and it was really kind of it was a very light, inspired, poetic reflections on remembrance generally, just like what does remembrance really mean. And it did incredibly well in film festivals. We won a number of film festivals, best cinematography in Toronto, best film in London. And, so we did a tremendous job. And then we followed it up with a fantastic, a second documentary short, totally on a separate issue. And so we worked very closely with the astronaut Nicole Stott, who was the first person to paint in outer space. She did watercolor in outer space. And she created something called the Space for Art Foundation. And Drew, you need her on the show because she's like, she fits in perfectly with the great work that you do. Not only is she a leader, but she aerospace, what you love, but art for social impact, right? So is what she does is she comes into pediatric cancer wards with a piece of white material, and she gives it to the young patients, and she asks them to paint designs on this white piece of material. And it turns out that white piece of material, it's not canvas, it's actually the material you make spacesuits out of. So they end up making like an American tapestry. They make like an American quilt, and that's a spacesuit. And they send that spacesuit to space, and the astronauts put it on. It's not, you can't functionally go outside of the space station, but they put it on, and then they video conference with the kids in the hospital, and they show them the art projects that they've done. And it's a super beautiful project. And I had the good fortune to work and talk to Nicole over some period of time as she was putting together the foundation. And I'm a little bit slow, so it took me a little while to figure out. And then finally at some point, I thought to myself, I thought we should really do a documentary. This is such a beautiful project. We should do a documentary on this. And so we did. And it was a documentary short, and it also did super, super well in the documentary film festival circuit. And one day I was on a podcast, and we were talking about Space for Art, about the documentary short. And then it occurred to me, it only occurred to me at that moment, they said, "So Michael, this is your second documentary on art." And I was like, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it. So here I was on the board of directors of a really significant art museum, the Blant Museum in Austin, Texas. I had just done an earlier documentary on Stumbling Stones Amsterdam about the world's largest distributed art project. And then we did Space for Art with, showcasing these young kids. And so it's funny because sometimes it's like through serendipity, but we realize like my next mission in life is to really have humanity's embassy for creatives on the moon, and I can deliver that. And so that was like the epiphany. And we have an awesome founding team, Richard King, who runs King Arts, who represents Tom Gillian, who's the highest grossing auction painter of contemporary Western painting. John Morris, who is super strong in creative art, but also in some of the things like cryptocurrency and NFTs, which become part of a project like this. So super strong team. And we did that impossible thing, was like getting this thing to the moon. So it's just been super gratifying to have this super crazy ambitious vision, but to be able to deliver it in reality.
Yeah, this is fun for me because I remember, some kids, everything they grab is a gun. They grab a stick, it's a gun. They grab, whatever, or a sword, or for me, it was always an airplane or a lightsaber, to be fair, or a lightsaber. And I have forgotten until this conversation how much aerospace and space itself is an aspirational thing, how exciting it is to think about. This has actually been really refreshing for me to think about. We homeschooled our kids. And so as we were going through the process, every year we bought a curriculum that every year you walk through a bunch of art from different time periods. And art and space have this beautiful connection of aspiration. And you're making a statement about your current society. And the good art is making a statement about our best selves or about our worst selves, but not like in a degrading way, like a don't be this, move on. And that's exciting, man. It's just been, I appreciate that from you. It's been very, very exciting to be inspired again for my original profession. So how do people get connected to this? How can they experience this?
So if they follow the link that you kindly put on the bottom, which is the luma.org, that allows people to enter the museum. So and just to be clear, about the mechanics of it. So as what we did is the first mission was a humanitarian mission that we did in conjunction with Lone Star, which is the provider of the first private data server on the moon. And then the second thing is that we then created in virtual reality a museum that gives you the experience that you're on the moon, and then we recurated those pieces. And so we have a number of galleries, and so our first gallery is the best of NASA. So NASA has millions and millions of images, and they've never curated it. So we went through the trouble to curate and just to fill the first gallery with some of the best images.
Let me jump in there real quick. For those that are watching, if you've never tried to curate something, it's really interesting how the activity of curation and AI models and AI data sets are similar. Like, it's actually a super fascinating science of how do I categorize and organize data and then present data in a narrative. Anyway, sorry, it's very exciting to me.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, right? Because Drew, you asked your guests to try to assemble their thoughts before the show, which is a type of curation, right? And so, hopefully, it allows all of us to be clear with our message. But it's the same thing with curating an exhibit, and to ask you fundamental questions like, what is this gallery about, and who belongs in this gallery, and how do we reach out to people? And I'll tell you, one of the super fun experiences. So our first mission was a humanitarian mission. We reached out to a lot of marginalized communities, and we said, look, guys, we have this amazing project. We can curate and put your artwork on the moon. And it's fantastic. There was a group of Afghani dissidents that had an amazing museum show in Germany. So we had the ability to curate the best of the best of the best and bring that into our museum. We work with a lot of Native American Indian tribes. We work with, just folks around the world, and it was super fun. And we were working with one very famous artist who's got her work in MoMA and so forth. And she was saying, hey, explain once again. She's like, it sounds interesting, it sounds super compelling, but just explain logically how this works. So we explained. And then she paused and she said, Michael, this is amazing because putting an art museum on the moon is like art itself. It's just such a statement, and it was gratifying because, you're trying to articulate it. You're trying to persuade people like, hey, this is worth doing. And to have people kind of parrot it back to you, but say, yes, I understand. And not only do I understand, it's like, it's such a cool, it's art, it's art in itself.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. And so, to the audience here, really seriously, go visit Luma and luma.org, 2a's.org. And for the first 10 folks that pull, or you can send Michael an email or contact them an email, tell them you saw him here on the Drew Sutton Leadership Show, and you'll get a curator's review. So one of the curators of the art museum will walk you through the art museum. And
so we'll organize. We'll select those first 10 requests that come in from listeners, and we'll send out a calendar invite. We'll select the first 10. We'll send out a calendar invite, and we'll have a curator's tour. And we can talk all about the architecture of the museum. How we picked this particular place on the moon. We can go through the best of NASA. We also have a cinema on the moon. We have a few movies that are up there, and people can enjoy them no charge. They can enjoy them how they like. We have a gallery of first artists. We have one of the images that we really enjoy. It was a photograph taken by the first Native American astronaut, Commander John Harrington. And it's of a feather and a flute floating in zero gravity. He took the image. So that's just this very kind of iconic image. We have the Afghani art. We have a Georgian artist from the Republic of Georgia. Just a lot of really interesting stuff. The server itself for Lone Star was designed by the world famous architect Bjorky Ingalls. He goes by Big, but Bjorky Ingalls. And the shape of the encasing of the server, it got a beautiful organic shape. But when the sun comes up and shines on one side of the server, it puts a shadow on the moon of one of the moonwalkers, the Apollo moonwalkers. So that shadow is on the moon. When the sun goes the other way, the shadow is of a woman. It's of astronaut Nicole Stott, and that's the other shadow on the moon. When you come into the gallery, that's one of the first exhibits that you see, is the shape of the server itself. So then you get a kind of, this is where all the artwork is contained, and this is art itself. The server is art itself, and then you have the choice to go into the different galleries in the cinema.
Man, this has been such an inspiring conversation for me. We're running out of time, and I don't want to take up all of your day, but this has been super fun. My challenge to the audience is master your craft so that you can turn your craft into art and inspire others. I think the act of leadership it lives in the words and the acts that we do. And I think that there's not much more exciting than taking people to the moon and back. So with that, my cheesiness aside, Michael, I want to give you the last couple of minutes here. Just speak to the audience and invite them to the museum, and then we will close out the show.
Yeah, well, Drew, thanks so much. And it was interesting because, Drew, I think you and I had a great bond, initially just on, the power of leadership and, kind of the framework of leadership, which was, super fun. But I think that, and particularly for young people, I think, and I hope that the bright side of AI is that we can help unleash more creativity, more impact. And Drew, I know that you're very involved with social impact, and people are involved with social impact investing. But I think the challenge for all of us is how do we leverage technology? How do we leverage money to have a great amount of impact, a great amount of inspiration? And I just encourage everybody, we have the tools, and it's really more about value system and more about attitude. And I strongly encourage people to do that. And I think one of the things, in the studies that I've seen about people that are reluctant to start their own project, whether it's an entrepreneurial project or developing a conference or even a podcast series or whatever, it's part of the human condition. We worry about failure. And I think if you find something that is powerful and compelling, that will get you through the dark concerns about failure. I mean, once you hold on to that and you just run with it, and look, we have all the technology, the technology to leverage. And I can just say that, trying to do entrepreneurial projects in the early 90s was super expensive, super inefficient. So literally, young people today can create projects that will probably have the possibility of achieving billions of dollars of value with tremendously more leverage than we had, even 10 years ago.
I love it. All right. So for those that are listening, follow Michael Potter on LinkedIn. He's always writing interesting articles, inspirational articles. Go visit Luma. Tell him you saw him on the Drew Sutton Leadership Show. Get a specialized tour and go make the world just a little bit brighter. With that, we are out.